And the human body, though the alcohol molecule itself, ethyl alcohol, is toxic in small amounts at concentrations produced by the natural fermentation process, the body has, through the liver and physiological system, a means for adapting to it, processing it, and purging yourself of the toxicity associated with alcohol. Um, However, dot comma, that does not mean that there weren't alcoholics when there was only fermented spirits. There were certainly alcoholics when there were only fermented spirits, because the Greeks only had fermented spirits, the Romans only had fermented spirits. The word alcohol itself is an Arabic word from the word al-kul, which means literally body eating spirit. That al-kul is pronounced ghoul. It's where we get the current term, still in the dictionary, ghoul, which means flesh-eating spirit, or demons that eat human bodies, corpses out of graves. Interesting. It was assigned a certain malevolence to it, wasn't it? Romans only had naturally fermented spirits, and that was wine and beer. And the Roman word for alcohol was also spirit, and not, although in a pagan sense, could be, depending upon your interpretation of it, would be considered good or bad. But depends on how you look at it now, right? The Roman god for alcohol was Dionysius. And many obelisks were built to Dionysius. And in order to give proper homage to this god of alcohol, children were sacrificed in blood at the base of the obelisk. So whether or not you consider that a malevolent spiritual energy or not, I guess is a matter of perspective. Certainly I would. Well, man's smart. So you had alcoholics, and alcoholism was well known during the Roman times, and it's written about in the Bible. It's written about in Greek literature. So this genetic predispositioning or unnatural reaction, biochemical reaction to alcohol, has been present in alcoholics' genetic predispositioning, as far as we know, since the inception of time. I don't believe the Human Genome Project has figured out where that maladaptation of the gene occurred in time. It remains a mystery, but it's certainly been around a long time. And our genius, man is a scientific genius. He figured out that little alcohol is good. A lot of alcohol would be much better. So if you look at something that ferments naturally, it can only ferment to a certain concentration of alcohol, and it varies. So beer, I believe, is about 6 or 7 or 8, depending upon what you buy, percent alcohol by volume. Wine's a little stronger, I think 12, 13, perhaps 14% alcohol by volume, which means the rest of it is generally water. Okay, that's a pretty good dilution ratio. Right? It's about 10 to 1, more in the case of beer. And water is essential when alcohol is consumed. Interestingly enough, when the human body consumes alcohol, and you can coat whatever of this you want, but you need water. In order to break down the alcohol molecule, a reaction occurs that's called dehydration synthesis. Yeah, exactly what you think it would do. Dehydration is just like dehydration. It consumes the water molecules in your body in order to break apart the bonds that exist in the ethyl alcohol molecule. Without water, H2O, you cannot disassociate the alcohol molecule. You cannot break it down. That's why if you ever got a really nice stiff hangover on, you're thirsty as hell the next day. It's because your body has sucked all the moisture that it can out of it to break down, to decompose the alcohol molecule. But we figured out things that said, you know what, 10 to 1, that's not a great ratio. That's way too dilute. We can't make it any stronger. It's just coming out 10 to 1. Nature, that's what nature's doing with it. But the great biochemists and alchemists of the 9th century figured out a way to distill spirits. Distilled spirits. It actually will still say on a bottle, of gin or vodka or rum, distilled spirits. And I find it's interesting that spirits, the Roman word, is used still for alcohol. Distilled spirit, consider it just a concentration. It's how we figured out. It's a chemical process. You see them, they're called distillation plants. Now they're called things like fine bourbon making process, and it's distillation. They distill the alcohol into very high concentrations, and now we've actually, and for quite some time, we've figured out how to make 100% pure ethyl alcohol. When I was in high school, there was something called wild turkey. I don't remember exactly, but I think it was 90 proof. And 90 proof means you multiply times 2 to get the percentage, which was 180% alcohol. That's some strong shit. There's a lot of distilled spirits out there that are approaching 100% distilled. You can buy pure ethyl alcohol. It does have some medicinal purposes in terms of disinfecting things for surgery. But now, pour this highly concentrated distilled spirit, it's the same molecule, into the human body, and some really bad shit happens. Now you find out how toxic the alcohol molecule really is. One of the things that's produced when the alcohol molecule is broken down is acetaldehyde. One of the next byproducts when alcohol is broken down is acetone. I don't know how many of you know it, but for the woman in the audience, if you've ever used nail polish remover, that's acetone. What's that smell like to you? I know when my wife would open a bottle of nail polish remover and sniff it, you knew damn well it was toxic, and you knew damn well it was something you shouldn't drink. So it begets a toxic, which begets a toxic. It takes a series of breakdowns to make the alcohol molecule non-toxic. And it is incredibly hard on the liver, incredibly hard on the liver. It consumes the life force of the liver, the energy within it, and thousands of enzymes and hundreds of different chemical reactions to consume it. So that's the nature of alcoholism. That's why I said, when alcohol works, it works, and when it doesn't, it doesn't. Alcoholics have always existed, but its potential for abuse has been great, and it is abused by. It doesn't take an alcoholic to abuse alcohol. There's a whole classification in the American Medical Association's diagnosis code for chronic alcohol abusers. There's heavy alcoholic abusers. These are people that use alcohol habitually, destructively, but they're not alcoholics. If they were to stop drinking, there would not be a physiological withdrawal process. They choose to do it for whatever reasons. Usually it's a psychological reaction to stress. So there's people that don't drink. There's normal social drinkers, and I'm not condemning normal social drinkers. From what I understand, I might have had some ancestors 50,000 years ago that crawled out of a cave to consume some light amounts of grape. And I'm glad for that, because I don't want to live in a cave. I'm not condemning its use. So why is it that people don't want to necessarily hear about a spontaneous recovery? The only thing that can conquer alcoholism is a spiritual experience. I had a spiritual experience, a profound spiritual experience. It was a spontaneous, extraordinary event. After 42 years of alcoholism and 10 years of bleeding to death, I bled out on my kitchen floor. I was sent to a hospital. I was resuscitated. I was given a blood transfusion. I was stabilized, though I was put on a mechanical ventilator, and I was tube fed and in a coma, but I was stabilized. That night, I had another massive GI hemorrhage caused by my damage to my liver that I'd done from alcoholism. This bleed couldn't be stopped. They inserted an obsolete tube in my body called a Blakemore tube, which is essentially a large balloon. They put the Goodyear blimp inside me and inflated it. Stopped the bleeding, but pretty soon, if they don't figure out a way to stop the bleeding in me through something, they have to take the tube out, because all it did was crush all the blood vessels inside my esophagus and stomach, which prevented blood from flowing to it, which of course stopped the bleeding, but it also prevented the oxygenation of those organs. Human flesh, cells from every organ, every dimension of your body require oxygen in order to sustain life. If not, necrosis will start to occur, and that's the dying off of cells. Necrosis would start to occur within the lining of, and eventually my entire esophagus and my stomach. And necrosis is kind of a spontaneous event. When a cell dies, it gives off toxic poisons and chemicals that accelerate the death of surrounding cells. So combined with death from lack of oxygen, with more toxins being imposed, your organs will die very quickly. And I was flown by shock trauma helicopter to the University of Maryland Medical Center with the Goodyear blimp inside my stomach and esophagus, waiting for people to figure out how it is that I could live. And in the coma that I was in, I had a spontaneous extraordinary event, and when I came out of the coma, alcoholism had been lifted from me. There's a second part to your question. The first one was, why don't people want to hear about it? And it's negative. They're cynical because of the years of desperate trying. Desperate. They've lost hope. So they've closed the window on that. The second reason is that I have seen alcoholics that I've known in Alcoholics Anonymous experience a full recovery over a period of time. And how much time? It depends. And it's always through a spiritual experience. At the heart of AA, the true Alcoholics Anonymous organization founded by Bill Wilson, who himself had a spontaneous extraordinary event, and he recognized, he was the one that authored alcoholism can only be conquered through a spiritual experience. But I have seen alcoholics recover over a period of time through a spiritual experience. Sometimes you'll hear the word moment of clarity. It's a common term used in Alcoholics Anonymous. All of a sudden, in some different facet, something different experience in everybody's life, when they're trying to recover from alcoholism, you'll hear they had a moment of clarity. I remember one woman, she was in her 30s, and she was an alcoholic, suffering terribly. She was drinking, and she was driving her 2 young children to school. And she looked in the rearview mirror, and she saw her children, and she said for the first time she had a moment of clarity. It was as if time stopped for her. The compulsion, the obsession, and desire to drink froze for just a moment. And she saw her children, felt the maternal instincts that she should have had, the love outpouring for these children. And time stopped long enough for her, for that to introduce a spiritual experience in her life. And she stopped drinking from that point forward. That is a spontaneous, extraordinary event. It took time to occur. It took time to make sure. And she works at maintaining it. But she recovered. So whether it takes, and I've seen it take 30 years. I've seen it take, in my case, I really can't tell you how long it took because I was in a coma for 6 days. So I say spontaneous. Hell, it might have taken a week. I don't know how long it took. I know I left this earth an alcoholic, drinking alcoholically, knowing it would probably kill me, and hopeless. I didn't drink to die, but I was dying to drink. And I woke up without a will, desire, craving, compulsion, or obsession, or trace of one to drink on August 14th of 2016, about 2.5 years ago. So there's 2 parts to the answer to that question. One is that recovery requires a spiritual experience, and nobody can say what duration of time it would require for that event to occur. And I can't even say how long it took to occur in my life. But one thing I do know, actually a few things I know, I had to be completely broken, smashed. I believe my providence gave me 100 opportunities to have a spiritual experience and recover from alcoholism. But I was so hardened. My heart had become so hardened. I had become so consumed, possessed by the evil, malevolent energy of alcoholism in mind, body, soul, and spirit that I refused to accept it. I wouldn't allow myself a moment of clarity. Though I thought I was earnestly trying, I would tell you I was sincere. Alcohol remained the most important thing in my life. And so, apparently God did have a plan for my recovery. Unfortunately, being broken was always, and for every alcoholic, is a necessary step. It's required before you can have the spiritual experience to recovery. And what did it take to break me? I guess about everything. Death. When I bled out on my kitchen floor, I was lying there about 8 hours. When they brought me to the emergency room, I was hypothermic. My body had started freezing to death. I was critically dehydrated. In addition to all of the blood and plasma they transfused in my body, I was given almost a gallon of essentially water. It's a lot of fluid. My heart itself was having a nuclear meltdown. My heart rate was approaching 170 beats per minute. Oh, that's a fast run. And I don't know for how long it was there. Probably a long period of time. The doctors told me that most people in that condition, having lost that chronic amount of blood, die from a heart attack. You see, I was gasping for oxygen, and my heart was beating. My cardiovascular system was doing what it was supposed to be doing. It was doing what a lot of you have been told, do more with less, a lot less. The problem is I was gasping in oxygen, but there was none available for my body to use because oxygen is transported by blood via hemoglobin. My lungs were filling with it, and none of it was getting to the organs that needed to be, or very little of it. So I was a dead man. That's what it took for me to be broken.